of this webinar. I hope you enjoy it. Moving a face-to-face pre-sessional course online, what the implications for teacher training are. So I'm speaking to you guys from Rochester in Kent, and I'll spend a second just to introduce myself. I'm really speaking to you as a temporary teaching fellow at Warwick University, where I'm absolutely honoured and delighted to be part of a team doing probably what most of the people attending this webinar are actually doing. I'm relatively well known in different fields as an author, business English, and also in EAP as well. Probably most for my books on learning technology, which I've co-written with a number of people over the years. And I think it's probably a good moment just to set the record straight and actually say that I'm not a doctor. It took me 6 years to get my master's, so I didn't want to spend the rest of my life studying to be a doctor, even though people in Tunisia and Russia, where I'm known as Professor Sharma, don't actually kind of get that. So we're going to kick off with a poll. And what I'd like you to do is just to close your eyes for a second and just actually think of something that you actually want to learn about, something that you might take a course in. And just make a quick note, a mental note, or dare I say it, an analog note on a piece of paper which you have cunningly next to your digital device. Let me give you about 7 seconds just to think about something that you'd like to study. Okay, now that you've thought about it, I have some absolutely unbelievable news, which is Penny, in her generosity as TELSIG and Barley, are actually going to give you a prize, which is the course of your dreams. They only want you to do one thing, and that's click a box which shows which type of course you would like to take. You've got 3 options. Option 1, and this is the poll, is to take it close by you in a nearby centre, that's face-to-face. The second is an online option. And the third option is to do a classic blended hybrid course of 50-50. So you probably need to make your choice again very, very quickly, because Penny, who is wonderful, has already opened the voting. You won't have long to vote. Don't agonize, for goodness sake, just decide off the bat, is that the idiom? What you want to take, and we'll watch the votes coming in. And because I wrote the book about blended learning, everybody's trying to please me by lying through their teeth and telling me that they're going to take a blended course, which is winning massively over face-to-face, which is a final place, and online is somewhere in the middle. So in a few seconds, Penny will close the voting at that point, and we'll just have a look at what you chose. Great, so I'll announce the winners in reverse order. So in last place, and this probably comes as maybe a bit of a shock to all you campus-based folks, is face-to-face. Somewhere in the middle is online, and the winner by a small margin is blended learning. So thank you very much, guys. Penny now can take that away, but we've got a lot of rich data here that we'll look back on. So I'm just going to pause this webinar just for a moment, and just to say that, excuse me, it's worth, after this finishes, actually going away and thinking about that task, because it's quite interesting. And I don't know what courses you want to take, but over the next couple of minutes, if you want to type the title of the course, such as the MoMA course on modern art, and a letter next to it, which would be face-to-face, O, F2F, O, or BL. It'd be really, again, interesting to look back at the data. I'm just going to tell you my preference. If I'd been asked that question, I'd have immediately said I wanted to do a yoga course. Before the coronavirus, if you'd asked me, could I do that course online, I'd have probably fallen about laughing and say no, because my instructor gives me hands-on, he's in Coventry, I'm in Kent, and I hardly have any classes. But I think the coronavirus lockdown is quite an interesting example of facing and changing your beliefs. And if you ask me now, I'd say with more delight than I could ever muster, absolutely yes. I've got Vin, my guru, to teach us all on using Zoom, and my occasional classes have changed into such regularity that my yoga practice has taken off since I've switched. So all I can say is that the courses that you've chosen that we might see in the chat will be many and different, and what we're talking about here really is compromise, context-bound situations, and all the constraints that we live in. So it doesn't matter how much you believe in face-to-face teaching. If your university is closed for the summer, then you're working under a constraint. So let's start this webinar. The aim is stated there. It's really providing ideas for teacher training, but particularly for this summer. Here's an overview of what we're going to do. There's 3 parts. Part 1, teacher training, why it's more complex than other forms of training. Part 2, just things that I learned when I actually taught in Zoom recently. And then just a few ideas which we're just discussing at the moment about how we might run things in summer. And if we have time, I really, really hope you have the lovely experience of meeting in a Zoom breakout room some of the people that you've been working with during the summer. So really, these are just a few ideas that I developed for an IATEFL presentation that hasn't happened in Manchester. My own experience of teaching, and then starting to create some ideas, and please contribute to those ideas if you wish in the forum. So I want to really stress that this is a presentation I'm just presenting to you guys. Obviously it will be slightly interactive, but that does mean that I'm not ever going to look at the chat. I can't afford to do that. So I'm delighted that there are people doing that for me. And I will make this PowerPoint available afterwards, and also there'll be the references, which of course, since we're all busy, there's no chance I can do this week, but it will be available for you at the weekend. So it very much builds on Sophia's presentation. That's how I had to view it during lockdown, with my work screen, my trying to get to know notes going on. So I thought I'd take notes, and also having Sophia very small there in the corner. It's not ideal, but that's how I had to do that. So let's kick off with part 1. And this part is 7 reasons why technology training is actually, in my belief, more complex than ordinary in-service training. And here's the first reason. Inevitably, jargon is used. I'm going to show you a list of words and acronyms, and I'll leave the list there for about a minute. Just have a look at the list. If you see any word or term that your teachers do not need to know, all you need to do is type that word into the chat. So the assumption is they need to know all these words. But if you see something that you think you can get through the whole of your summer and your teachers don't need to know that word, please type it into the chat. Okay, guys, I'll shut up for a minute. Okay, I daren't look at the chat. All I'll say is that some people say there are only two things certain in life, which is death and taxes. I think there are three, and the third one is that you will have all type different words into the chat. So that's going to be a rich seam to mine later on. This is very much linked with words having multiple definitions. The classic is face to face. Is it in a bricks and mortar school, or are we talking about doing face to face online or virtual face to face? Or blended, are we talking about a classic mix of classroom with online, or are we talking about this summer, which is actually a virtual blend? And I'd actually even argue it's not distance learning. It's also very much linked with connotation. We all work under the pressures of using words like teacher, student, blended, virtual classroom, the classroom, and remembering, I think, that they have and hold different meanings and connotations for different people. Teachers, students, umbrella terms which cover technophile teachers and technophobe teachers, technophile students and technophobe teachers. Blended, the best of both worlds. That's my little crazy world. The worst of both worlds. Virtual classroom. For some people, that is a relief and a release because it enables people to do differentiation. For others, the virtual classroom is not as reliable as a bricks and mortar classroom. And then the actual teaching classroom that we're in, which for me is a place of joy and dynamism. And I was absolutely shocked when an online teacher said, oh, yeah, that's where you have to go just above middle, isn't it? You've always got to do it lockstep. You don't have the freedom that you have in an online classroom. So all these terms mean different things to different people. Even the underlying theories are fascinating. If you say the word lecture, what's the underlying theory behind it? If you say Moodle, it's the same thing. If you take an up-to-date app, this is probably I'd say one of the most exciting apps in English language teaching. But what's the underlying theory? And again, it's shocking. What's it based on? In many, many ways, it's many, many things, very cutting edge like AI and adaptive learning and machine learning, but it's also based on things that Confucius said, things that are very common in teaching in the Middle East, where people value repetition. So that's the first reason. The second is that it's a controversial area in and of itself. I mean, we all know that language teaching is full of controversies and different perspectives. But if you overlay another element, which is technology, then you have a software developer who has absolutely no idea what the teachers want because they just want to know if A and B go together. And you have an instructional designer who creates a program which is designed to be used purely in a self-study mode and has no concept about communicative ELT. So there is an added layer of, if you like, complexity. The next reason is I will argue that there is a disconnect between theory and practice. I'm very well aware that you'll never invite me to do anything else again because you obviously work in an area possibly in the middle of these two things. But I would say that if you want to study theory, you'd get one set of books. And if you wanted to actually do something practical, you'd get another set of books. And that, I think, affects a lot of our teachers who maybe have come to the summer with a diet of Scrivener and Harmer, but maybe they need to read a different set of books. And I'd be extremely interested if anybody is going to give those teachers a book from theory and research in the fact that we've only got a few weeks to get them ready. And I wouldn't be surprised if the books that are selected have quite short bibliographies. Okay, let's just pause for a second and I'll just tell you a very short story of me, my life, and how I bounce between practice and theory or research. I started life, yeah, sorry about that picture. Televisions did look like that a bit in the pre-digital age. I started teaching a long time ago, and if you'd asked me, is my world practice or theory, I'd have said it was practice. Everything changed when I went to Barcelona to a conference about computers. And I looked at this list of speakers and I had no idea about anybody's name. I'd just started a master's. I had my bibliography in my pocket and I opened it. And I was absolutely blown away that every single person on the bibliography, Varsha, Carol Chappell, and so on, Martha Pennington, they were all at the conference speaking. And I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I'm an RSA diploma trained teacher. I'm allowed to teach every day in the classroom, having no idea about who researchers in my field. So I thought I kind of met research. And then since then, I'd probably say I'm both practice and research. And I'm guessing I'm talking to a lot of people who are also somewhere in the middle between practice and research. So if you want to know why I'm not a doctor, the short answer is longitudinal studies. If you want to do a longitudinal study about the interactive whiteboard, you do have to know that by the time you've finished your PhD, most people will have forgotten about them and they'll be talking about something else. So we're going to move to the third and the fourth poll. I think it is. Penny, I might have made a mistake, but I hope you know which polls, because we've got a couple of questions for you. So I'm going to hand over to Penny. She's going to, thank you, ask you the first question. You haven't got long to vote, but I'll read out the question. Okay, we're losing lots and lots of tools. Sorry, so we've got lots and lots and lots of tools. So the simple question is, do learning technologies improve language learning outcomes? Okay, looks like the votes are nearly all in. Great, and it's absolutely fascinating, don't you think, that we use these things all the time? So Penny will now stop sharing that. We'll have a look at the poll results later. But she's going to ask you another question now in the poll. It's the same question, really, but it's very, very slightly rephrased. Here's the question. Does the research prove empirically that learning technologies improve language learning outcomes? Okay, as the results come in, I'm already totally and completely gleeful that if you change the nature of the question, that my hypothesis is that there would be a different answer, even though essentially it's the same question in some ways. So, thank you so much. What does the research say? Well, as little ago as 2016, Nikki concluded that the jury is still out just because it's not necessarily Moodle that makes the difference. It's how you use Moodle that may be one of the contributing factors as to whether it does or doesn't help. Admittedly, Nikki was only looking at adolescents, but I think that that's a dedicated researcher who works in a company which is very cutting edge in delivering digital, actually stopping and thinking what the research says. So I think it hopefully supports my view that there may well be a disconnect. Let's move on to the fourth reason, which is that we very, very rarely compare like for like. We often find ourselves comparing two things that maybe shouldn't be compared in the first place. Certainly when online began, we were always comparing classroom and online until Ushy Felix from Australia just said, why are we comparing apples and oranges? Shouldn't we be thinking more of good classroom teaching and poor classroom teaching, good online teaching and poor online teaching? There are thousands and thousands of platforms. So things that you might have compared during the last 3 hectic months might be platforms for delivering, well, they're there. And what I'd like you to do is, can you add to the list? Can you add a couple of things that you compare that maybe it's quite interesting that they're not designed in the same way, if you see what I mean. Sorry, that's getting a bit dodgy. What I mean here is that Microsoft Teams is a business product for use in the corporate world. Moodle is a socio-constructivist platform designed for education, and they're different, but they can be used in similar ways. But why are we comparing them? So if you want to add anything else that you've compared, please do add that to the chat. Let's move on to the fifth reason, how important attitude and beliefs are in this area. And I believe that everything is connected with this lovely term, cognitive dissonance. So that actually people make statements. That's a good example. I don't use that because it always crashes. And just the use of the word always indicates the teacher's attitude there. So we have too much knowledge at the moment. You can get it on the internet. But actually doing stuff, the actual skills is different, but how you feel about something, what you believe in, is absolutely critical. Okay, there are many, many, many things that we can say that technologies can do. They can do this, they can do this, they can do this. You can have a meeting in this media, but that's really not the same as whether you can actually do it. So I know you can work together on a document in Zoom, but that doesn't mean I've ever managed to do it. And then when I went to a Zoom training, it all got tangled up into who was on Google and who wasn't on Google and so on, or whether it's appropriate. And I think at the heart of blended learning, appropriacy is a critical issue. This is why we've chosen the tool, and that's for this purpose. So sometimes the tech doesn't always work, of course. That's the seventh reason, and that in and of itself stands as a reason why tech training is more complex. So that's the end of really the very, very first, and it's the longest part of the webinar, just my reflections and my thoughts about why technology training is more complex. So we're going to move on now to the second part. We're going to start this with a poll. The second part is about stuff I learned recently just using Zoom. And in order to kick this off, Penny is going to launch the next poll, and it's about what you've done so far in Zoom. Have you done any of these things? You can, of course, tick one more answer. Have you taught one-to-one? Have you taught a small group, such as the one I'm doing at the moment? Have you taught a bit bigger group, 15, given a webinar? Super. Thanks, guys, for voting. And if you've never done anything in Zoom, it's a very interesting thing. And I would say that one of the seven things I've done in I've learned teaching in Zoom is that I launched in with the misconception that because I'd done webinars and training in Zoom, that I could teach in Zoom, and nothing could be further than the truth. In actual fact, the actual size of the cohort that you're dealing with impacts massively on what you're doing. If you're doing a webinar, you could sit here and do what I'm doing. Thanks to the wonderful Penny, I can just not look at the chat. I can just get on with doing what I feel I do with unconscious competence, which is deliver a presentation. But I slipped right the way back the minute you start teaching into conscious incompetence. And if you've never actually taught in Zoom, you may be in unconscious incompetence. You may not have any idea of what's in store for you. But I learned a lot. That was the first thing I learned, that if you have 4 people, you can use breakout rooms. And that's like really, really important to know. The second thing is you absolutely have to know something about how the technology works. That was quite shocking for me because last year I didn't need to. My the screen broke down. Of course, all I did was what I always do, which is turn to the phone and get the learning technologist to come in and sort it out for me. And I was very, very happy. Excuse me, I was also a little bit worried because I was running around like an idiot, thinking my lesson has gone pear-shaped. And in actual fact, none of the students even noticed that that guy was in the room. Because of my 16 students, they just had their laptops open and they just continued with the TED talk as if I wasn't around. That was amazing to me. It refers to the normalization of technology, that for students having a smartphone, having a Mac Airbook is just like their life. So it didn't matter. This is what I envisage might happen in pre-sessionals this year. In other words, using the TPAC model, technology, pedagogy, and content, my belief before this summer was that a language teacher has technology there as an optional enhancement, that they know about teaching, they know about the actual content, what a phrasal verb is, and you know, if you use tech, it's great, but you can also have students hold their hand up. And if excuse me, if it goes pear-shaped, excuse me, if it goes pear-shaped, you can just say to your students, don't worry, there's a flip chart here. In this new medium, I think might have to rethink the TPAT model because it's not optional. It's essential. And if you can't hear your student, you do have to drill down to how they can fix their microphone. And I can't do that yet. I still believe I'm a teacher. I still believe I don't necessarily need to do it, but I'm slowly deleting the word necessarily and saying if I'm going to teach online, I do have to be able to help them with the bit I've never been able to do before. Let's move on to how you're going to teach and what's going to be behind you. And it's quite interesting. There's a massive amount to learn here. One of them is I still keep holding handouts up, and my students say, I can't see the handout because of the way your screen is. You probably noticed that there's an interesting photo of somebody called Daddy-O. Don't miss out all the film references here, by the way, teaching a lovely lady called Julia Roberts. But you know, what what names will your students display, etc., etc. There's a lot to think about just before you even begin. This was something I learned very late. Just have a second screen. I'm watching this webinar in two screens, and on my second screen I can finally actually see the chat. Most of the lessons that I gave at the beginning, it took a long time that I couldn't help my students because I kept saying, go here, go there, but the student says go where because your screen is different. And when you are doing something like I'm doing now, even though according to Zoom you might be able to see the chat, they do say some features are disabled. Well, which features? Well, that's one of them. It might be quite hard to use the chat. Something else I discovered was just because I played a video didn't mean that they heard it very well. And I understand that streaming to 40 or 50 machines, as I did in Germany a couple of weekends ago, meant that quite a lot of people had it a very jumpy ride, and that actually influences, as a washback on what it is that you're going to use. The next thing I discovered was that time really, really is different in those rooms, and what you want to do in 60 minutes you have to be a lot less ambitious, and it probably translates to fewer minutes, online. And the next thing, a final thing I discovered was that error correction, it was for me really quite difficult. I've got my own beliefs about error correction. It's partly because I taught in a certain European country where accuracy wasn't a problem whatsoever. If I asked my students a question such as, where did you go last night? I could probably make a cup of tea in the time it took for me to actually hear the answer, because in my student's brain was a process along the lines of I, simple past, went, preposition to, I went to the cinema, and then time marker last night, I went to the cinema last night, and the students rehearsed it in their brain, and finally, after I'd actually completely got bored, somebody said, I went to the cinema last night, which you can't really fault for accuracy. I mean, you could probably pick it up for intonation. Then I've done a lot of work with students from China, and quite often they, at the start, make lots of problems with he and she. But when I ask my questions to the group, I really don't feel terribly comfortable interrupting them, because it might take quite a long time to get them to actually contribute to the lesson. So my Zoom practice was in a certain European country where, because of language reasons, accuracy is prized more highly in that particular culture than it is in the UK, where you can go, oh, I ain't done nothing, for example, on TV, and nobody picks you up. Whereas this is a country where you need to know the last bit of your sentence before you can construct it. So, in fact, accuracy is very important. And the students in that particular group that I had judged the teacher on the value of their immediate correction. And I couldn't correct. There was no way in Hades that I could think about the technology, think about the accuracy and the fluency, and write a running list of student mistakes. So it was really, really different. And my feedback was, you are well, they loved me as a teacher from the socialization side, but they didn't think much of my correction techniques. So I was able to give absolutely excellent quality feedback later, because of course I could record the lesson. I sat and watched the lessons afterwards and did the feedback sheet, but that has a massive time implication. So there's lots of things that you can do, but you know, it's really, really quite interesting. So I hope that you enjoyed that small kind of look at some of the things that I learnt using Zoom. And that brings us to the end of the second part of this webinar. And we're going to move on to some ideas for teacher training. I'll just show you a short extract from the abstract of this webinar. So that's our starting point. So the first thing I thought would be very, very useful would be what we're doing now, which is just sitting down and thinking about sending out an audit of, what digital skills the teachers have. And I think that's the starting point. So you create it from the point of view of what do you want them to use. So it's no good, I think, asking them which learning management system do you know, because you would have 450 different answers ranging from Edmodo to Moodle to the different platforms that we use in our school, which is of no value at all if you're going to use X. So you do need to do this audit though, and then from that I suggest strongly that you develop your own competencies. I've been involved in creating digital competency charts, and it is unbelievably difficult. Here's a straightforward one because it's not about technology, but the minute you put in a technology strand, it loses a certain amount of logic, because if you go vertically, after you've learned how to use Moodle, the next step is not become a Moodle administrator, because it's not for everybody. So that's why it clashes with CPD and people go in different directions. So it's much better to do your own along the lines of Zoom. Do you want your teachers to do this, this, this? What do you want your teachers to do? Because CALL is situation specific. CALL, computer-aided language learning, everybody's situation is different. Our situations are similar, but the minute that one university chooses Teams and another university uses Moodle, they become totally different. The competencies become different. And I think that the reason it's so hard to do competency-based charts for technology is because the one on the left is two-dimensional. That what's actually on the right is three-dimensional, and it's incredibly difficult to actually work it out, which is why I gave up my teaching in Second Life course. I didn't actually, I finished it, but at the end I was trying to join two three-dimensional objects together, and I nearly cried after 1 hour, and I couldn't do it. And I wrote to Gavin Dudney, who was running the course with the consultancy, and he said, we'll give you your certificate, Pete, because you went through building objects in Second Life, but that's not what I want to do. So if you go into Second Life, the logical top end isn't you become a course builder. That's something completely different. So with the range of tools around, I think all these things, they should be generic. So if you want your teachers to vote in Zoom, let them just do it with Zoom. If they want to do it with Mentimeter, if they want to do it with Kahoot, that's absolutely fine. You'll have at least 100 teachers that will want to do that, and it's not a problem. They're doing voting, but what's critical is, the kind of skills that you need to do it are more generic than specific. Moving on to these different tips, I think it wouldn't make sense to, from the audit, work out who needs to be with which other teachers and to actually create teaching teams. I think it's useful that if some people come out as being absolutely brilliant tech trainers, they're almost inevitably going to be part of the tech training team, I'd have thought, and then they could work with a small group. It doesn't have to be one person doing it. I won't obviously teach you guys to suck eggs, because absolutely obviously you would train the teachers in the way that you'd want them to teach. So if you're using Microsoft Teams as a way of getting your teachers to communicate with each other outside the classroom, then you'd be setting up your training using Microsoft Teams. So you'd get to know the actual tool through your training. Pretty useful, I'd have thought, would be a bank of how-to videos, and don't reinvent the wheel. If you want to do something, it takes a few minutes, a few seconds, in fact, to do a screen recording, but there are some excellent ones all around. Good old Russell, we love him. He was at Warwick, and you know, if somebody needs to know how to use a breakout room, I wouldn't send them to the Zoom training video, which is very quick and assumes that you know everything. I send them to an ELT expert that assumes that you don't know everything, and Russell has honed his style. So 2 minutes watching a video of Russell will save you time. You know, I think that would be great. And then just planning early, because there's so much to get through that you just might want to start it earlier than one might think in terms of teams. And I would say, don't confuse what might happen in our classrooms with the kinds of online teaching that go around, where people have spent a long time being developed. So it does take a while to get to know a tool, to change your practice, and then finally actually start teaching well, or reaching the highest level of flying in terms of your teaching. So that's really the end of the content part of this webinar, and I shared with you just some ideas just to get you thinking about how you're going to do things. And I'm going to now actually, with great pleasure, hand back to Penny. We're going to experiment something now. We're going to see if we can throw you guys out for 5 or 10 minutes, so that you may
I can't set the timer for a specific time.
Sorry, you might.
Should I set an alarm instead?
So this is one of the funniest things ever that happens to me. But
breakout rooms are ready. I have launched them.
Okay. Can everybody see that slide? So it's just to collate all the questions that you might have in your breakout room. Just choose someone that will be happy to email questions. And if you haven't seen the slide, then just have fun and say a virtual hi to people that you've probably been working with. So I'll see you in a few minutes, guys.
Sorry, excuse me. Do you think we could have the slides in the breakout rooms? Or the question? It seems you're muted.
Yes is the answer, but I can't do it because I haven't reached the point of being able to do it. I hope that it's an honest thing. I mean, and this is what we're going to have to think about. How do you get, because most students forget what the task is when they get to the breakout room.
Okay.
This doesn't matter. This is just say hi and hello. But if somebody could just make a list of the questions, that would be really, really lovely. So the answer is yes, you can, but I can't help you at the moment. Sorry. But I will be able to by summer. I promise myself I'll keep learning.
Maybe I should have taken a screenshot and just take it with me.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. Pete, can you show again the PowerPoint with the questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm sharing it in the main area, but
But
the
I can't
critical.
see it. I can't. It just.
No, well, we're learning as we're going. I should have just. I realise now. Shown the slide and gone through it, and then asked you to put people in breakout rooms. And the mistake that I made was, I was, like, send people. It doesn't matter for this, I don't think, because
Can you
when
show
people
me the
come back,
slide? Because there is a group that they have asked for my help. They're a bit
yeah,
confused.
yeah, yeah. I don't really know how to, because at the moment the closest I could probably do is take a photograph of it and
Yeah.
then email it to you. But basically, I'll read it through. It just says, in your breakout room, say hi, choose a writer
Yes.
to collate any questions. The writer should be someone happy to email the questions to me. So it's just a chance to say hello and
Okay.
ask questions. Sorry, Penny.
Okay, don't worry.
See you later. See you in 5 minutes. Hiya.
Hello.
Hi, Penny.
Hello.
Hi. Sorry, that was a great example of, I know you can, well, there's things you can and can't do in breakout rooms, but it doesn't actually matter for this particular webinar.
So what should I broadcast to them that in how many minutes we're going to close the break?
I think if you wanted to press leave in a couple of minutes or close breakout rooms, I think they all get a message that says there's a minute. Your room will close in a minute. That's what I think will happen. So, and then hopefully they'll all come back.
Okay, I send them a message as well.
Hi, Pete, it's Simon. Can you hear me?
Simon, hello. Are you allowed to speak?
I apparently so. I don't know if I'm supposed to be. Sorry
Not
about that.
really. Not really. Not. Yeah, you could say hi because not everyone's come back. So, where are you, by the way?
No, I'm just saying I've been into the breakout rooms and then I've come back here.
Yeah.
And I've been back to the breakout room and now I've come back here because nobody in our breakout room was sure what was going on.
Yeah. In that case, get everybody. Penny, I'd just close all the breakout rooms, get everybody back, and then I'll explain.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, all breakout rooms will close in 55 seconds.
Great.
So it was a nice thing, it's the first time I saw in action how a breakout room works, and I see our attendees observed how a breakout room actually works. And if we like it, this is something we can do it in our teaching as well.
Yep. Let's see when, if you let me know when everybody is back.
Okay, 5, 4,
And then I'll start
3,
speaking.
1. Yes, everyone is back closely. Yeah.
Okay, so hi everybody. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so as you can see, Penny and I liaised very long and hard into the night to make sure that we created the kind of dismay that you can feel the first time you're hurled into a breakout room. On a slightly more serious note, I think it demonstrates a huge amount of things what this webinar was about. You have to put people in breakout rooms because you have 18 students, you have 18 squares on your screen, and only a very masochistic person would actually want to talk to 18 squares for 1 hour. So breakout rooms, and this is why it's so difficult to do a competencies list, should technically appear as a late acquired skill. In other words, you can see I'm new to it. I've never actually hit that button apart from a couple of friends, but I've never actually hit the button as Penny has today. Penny maybe just at the very start of her chucking people into breakout rooms mode, and she's learning as well. Everybody's learning. So if I did that all again, before putting you in breakout rooms, I would actually set up the task. This is what I wanted to say to you, but I didn't quite have time because you were all running away into your breakout rooms very quickly. I would say that when you arrive, the first thing to do is to say hi and maybe say hello to each other, then sit around and say, choose somebody to collate the questions. Somebody's been, obviously, in all the confusion, people say, I don't understand, I don't really understand what questions and so on. These are the questions that you would normally ask at the end of a webinar. I would say to you guys, do you have any questions? This webinar is very different because I know that there won't be enough time for me to deal with the questions. I also know I'm not very good at dealing with questions, even if the moderator gathers them all together and then says, okay, Pete, here's your first question. Which is the best learning management system? And I go, wow. And I would rather answer questions asynchronously and actually think about my answer. So one of the things, obviously, that we'll all have to do is to work out, when you go to your breakout room, how will the students have the task? So I'm just exploring this. I don't know. I've got no idea. Can they see the slide? No. Somebody suggested take a photo. And of course, this is where our students are ahead of us, because they might naturally just take a photo and one of the students will just arrive in a breakout room and read out what they have on their smartphone, and so on and so forth. But obviously, you have a task and then you do your task in the breakout room. So it's probably time to say in the last couple of minutes that all I expect is that when we look at the chat,